is Irish Books, for intelligent discussions of contemporary Irish writing. As Ireland declines into an authoritarian state, a mother struggles to hold her family together in Paul Lynch's Booker-winning novel. Irish Books is hosted by Christopher Morash.
We're in the august environs of Trinity College Dublin on a glorious morning in the building where the Wilde family once lived.
In the room, possibly where Oscar was born and probably where he said his first words.
Possibly. That was the first contribution in this episode of Christopher Morash, who is officially my guest, but really he is hosting me. It would be difficult to imagine a work further from Wilde's corpus than the book we're discussing today, the Booker-winning and much accoladed Prophet Song by Paul Lynch. Chris, can you give us an outline of the scenario of Prophet Song, please, when we open it?
In lots of ways, the narrative, the story in Prophet Song is relatively kind of straightforward and direct. It focuses around a woman named Eilish Stack, and Eilish lives in one of the suburbs of South Dublin, like a very recognizable Dublin. It's, Rathmines, Rathgar, that sort of part of the city. And her husband, Larry, is a teacher who's involved with the trade union politics. And he has, at the point the novel begins, he has effectively gone off on a march and not come home. And she just assumes, okay, he's going to come home. This is Ireland. He's going to come home. And as time goes on, you realize, no, he's not going to come home, because the Ireland in which Eilish lives has had a change of government, that a kind of populist authoritarian government has been elected. The National Party, a fictional one, has been elected. And things are moving towards authoritarianism. So what we do is we follow Eilish's trajectory as she deals with a country that is collapsing and then ultimately heading towards civil war. So she has 4 children. Her eldest son, Mark, is in his mid-teens. He is initially he's drafted by the army. He goes on the run and he joins the rebels.
This is to be an army that will be deployed against its own populace.
That's right. And he goes on the run and he joins the rebels, who are somewhere to the south, presumably Cork, because that's where the rebels always are. She also has a daughter Molly, a middle sort of son Bailey, and then a baby Ben. And one of the things that makes the novel so compelling is that in lots of ways, it's the story of a person who many of us would kind of recognize, an educated, professional, middle-class woman with a family, who's basically just trying to keep her family living their lives. She's, of course, when her son runs off and joins the rebels, she's concerned, but she's still trying to send the other kids to school. She's still trying to buy food in the shops. She's still trying to go to the butcher shop and buy the meat that they like. She's still trying to look after her father, Simon, who has dementia. She has a sister in Canada, Anne, who wants her to just leave the country. And she's saying, well, no, I mean, this is where I live. I'm not going to leave. And throughout the novel, her expectation is that it will work.
Bailey moves towards the door and she begins to strip the sheet from the bed, asking herself how many times this has happened since Larry is gone. He had never wet the bed before. She turns to see Bailey standing by the door with a look of whetted malevolence. He cries out at her, "You sent him away, didn't you? That's what you did. You're nothing but an old bitch." She finds herself stopped with stuttering hands, her mouth quivering. She bundles the wet sheets and sees herself in flight down the stairs. She will lance the evil in his eye like the pricking of a boil. She will lock the front door and climb into the car and let him stew alone in his room. She has not moved. Her eyes have dropped to watch her feet when she hears it fall from her mouth. The truth about his father. She is explaining the illegal arrest and detention, the efforts being made to get him before a judge, the fact that nothing will happen before Christmas. Her heart grows pained as she watches the boy's frowning disbelief. the sliding look in his eye, how his mouth slopes and then he buckles, silently to the floor, wringing his arms about his knees. What she sees before her is an idea of order coming undone, the world slewing into a dark and foreign sea. She holds him in her arms, seeking in her whispers to rebuild for her son, the old world of laws that lies broken at his feet. For what is the world to a child when a father without word can be made to disappear? The world gives it chaos. The ground you walk on flies into the air and the sun shines dark on your head. Molly is leaning in the door. "What's going on?" she says. "We're waiting outside in the car. We have to go to school."
She expects normality, doesn't she? She does.
Yeah,
she never relinquishes the idea that normality will resume and we'll realize we're sane people and we'll go back to the lives we once knew.
That's right. Yes, that throughout her assumption is Ireland will. This is Ireland. This is the EU. This cannot happen here. And the real low point of this for her comes when her son Bailey is injured. He's with a piece of shrapnel. So she does what you would do as a parent. She takes him to the hospital. And then when she goes to see him in the hospital, he's gone. And she's told that he's in another hospital. And so she goes to the other hospital. And then she's told he's in the morgue. And there's this horrific scene where she sees his body in the morgue. He's quite clearly been tortured. I mean, he's only a child. And she realizes things are not working. Things that this is not going to this is not going to get better.
And there's a sort of inevitability to that scene in the morgue, isn't there? That we all know that Eilish is going to find her son Bailey's body, and we're not waiting for a surprise in a plot twist. We're watching her struggle with her own denial of what is happening.
This is what makes the novel one of the most terrifying things I've read in a long, long time. Because I think as readers, we're more ambivalent than that, because the novel is so much filtered through Eilish's consciousness that on one hand, as readers, we think, yes, I think we think there's not going to be a happy ending here, but we are channeled through her, and optimism isn't even the right word, her disbelief that things can go this badly wrong. That, you know, and it's a fascinating book about the ways in which we make the abnormal normal. You know, that there's scenes where the family are in the house and they just kind of turn up the TV so they don't hear the gunfire and the mortar fire.
That's right.
And you think, yeah, that's probably what I would do. You know, that when things get bad, you sort of say, no, I'm going to try and assert some normality here.
Yeah, and they're strangely unreflective when they have to do remarkable things like put tape over the windows in case the windows shatter, and there's no pause for thought on that. They just resume whatever it is they're trying to.
That's right. Yeah. So it eventually reaches the point where Eilish realizes she does have to get out of the country, and she then makes her way to the border with Northern Ireland, and effectively becomes refugee. And her experience at this point, and this is very much toward the end of the book, is, you know, of refugees everywhere, of dealing with people who are working, you know, on the black market, effectively people human smugglers, who you pay money to and you don't know whether the money is ever going to come back to you, when they take you across the border at night and ending up in a kind of holding center. And then after this, and the whole novel is written in very, you know, it's very realistic, it's very detailed. Yes. I mean, I teach it in a course here in Trinity on the Irish city, and it's, you know, you could map Dublin from this book. It is very, very precise. It goes from being this novel that is very, very precise about where it is and where things happen, to the final scene where Eilish is basically taken, is through this process of being a refugee, and put on a boat. And you think, hang on a second, you know, where is she going?
It zooms out, doesn't it?
It does.
Into this sort of generalized vision of refugee experience. And as to where she goes, you're not the first person in the last week to say it's very ambiguous, because I took it that having been smuggled across the border to Northern Ireland, the family they all get into dinghies. And the novel gives us then this image of hope. The sea offers hope. Maybe it's any port in a storm. I don't really know.
You see, I think, to me, I think I think this is how the novel works. And this is, to me, why I think this is a great novel. I think the novel works as a kind of sleight of hand.
Okay.
Right? I think the entire novel is a kind of magic trick.
Okay.
Where one hand is over there busily waving and doing things, and you think, oh, this is a realist novel about the descent of a state into totalitarianism and what happens. And really, it's a metaphysical novel.
It's metaphysical. I'm not sure I can agree entirely that it's a realistic novel, because I think the descent of the Republic of Ireland into this sort of authoritarian state is far-fetched because of the level of integration with the European Union and what seem to be allusions to, say, revolutions in Ukraine over the last 20 years portray a very different set of political tensions to those around this country. And I don't quite buy the vagueness around this political change, which is probably deliberate, and it's perhaps to say it could happen anywhere.
You see, I think that's precisely, this is what I mean by the sleight of hand. This is the magic trick, right? That you and I could now have a debate for as long as we wanted to talk about whether or not Ireland could become a authoritarian, fascist state.
And let's just interject for a moment and say, of course, sadly, authoritarianism has become more topical in the few years since Prophet Song was published.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the month after Paul Lynch won the Booker for it, there were riots in the centre of Dublin where there were trams set on fire and police attacked, and there were images went around the world of the centre of Dublin on fire. And suddenly it was like, oh my God, it is a prophet song, it is a prophecy. But you see, I think that's the sleight of hand. I think the novel is not actually a speculation about whether or not Ireland could become a totalitarian state. It's a novel about what happens when a person's humanity is stripped down to its very raw, cruel core. That what happens when you strip away all these appurtenances, all these accessories of the state that allow us to live our lives as if our bodies weren't vulnerable, as if we weren't subject to hunger and pain. What happens to us then? Who do we become? And I think that's really what the novel's about.
I find that a very misanthropic element of the novel, because it seems that nobody acts charitably or altruistically unless they have some very specific affinity with the circumstances of loss. But people are constantly exploiting and cheating each other and taking advantage of the refugees when they have become refugees, and boycotting, of course, a word of Irish origin. Eilish is boycotted by the local butcher, amid many other scenes of microaggression and exclusion, which give a pretty bleak depiction of human nature, I think.
I think Lynch is a very, very dark writer. And Prophet Song is not unique in his body of work in that regard. I mean, his novel about the Irish famine, Grace, reaches a point where there are like 4 pages that are simply black ink, where it just gets so dark that there's not even words. And where what's suggested is going on in that novel is cannibalism. And it's just, well, you can't even say it, can't even write it. So yes, I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's again, but it's what he's pursuing as a writer is what do we have left if we strip away kindness, if we strip away altruism, if we strip all these things away. He gave a really interesting interview after he won the Booker. A really thoughtful interview where he describes the book as an exercise in radical empathy. And I think that's actually what it is.
Can you gloss that radical empathy for us, please?
Yeah, I think, when we watch, as we do every day, we watch, people in Ukraine or in Palestine standing looking at the ruins of their homes. We look at people in Palestine, say, with bowls out for food because they haven't eaten in days. We look at boats full of refugees in the Eastern Mediterranean, and it's very difficult to imaginatively put yourself into those bodies, to say, what would it be like to be that person?
And we don't want to either.
We don't want to.
The only way we can live with ourselves.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That our view of that kind of suffering is an external one. And the novel mediates that in some really interesting ways. There's a scene early on where there's a protest against this kind of national government turns into a kind of massacre. And they're at home watching it on TV, and Eilish's thought is, I know that place, I know that shop, and so there's this kind of distancing that we've become accustomed to. And I think what Lynch is doing is not letting us have that distance. He's putting us inside somebody's head who is very familiar. I mean, Eilish Stack, if she walked in the room, I would know her. She is somebody that the sort of people who read books and listen to podcasts about books know. And suddenly she is that person.
She's very much the Irish mammy. That's where she ends up as a character, and her professional life as, I think it's a biologist. Is very faintly shaded in.
Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, she's an educated professional as well. That she's, so there is that sense of, she's somebody, she has resources. She drives a Volkswagen, or is it Touareg or whatever, the big SUV.
I Googled the Volkswagen. It is a big SUV.
A big SUV, yeah. No, she lives in a part of the city that is, that's a nice part of the city to live in. Which has part of the city that has always been a middle-class residential area. He places the novel very, very precisely as to where he puts her, what she drives, where her father lives. That whole world is very, very, very precisely there.
The husband is entirely respectable, isn't he? He's a teacher. He represents the union, the teachers' union, and it is striking to an Irish reader the idea of an attack on education by the state.
Yeah, but one of the reasons I think that the politics of it, and particularly the politics of populist authoritarianism, are, I say, part of the magic trick, part of the diversion, is that when the tide of the war turns and the rebel army come into Dublin, things are just as bad. And I think for civilians caught up in civil wars, that's probably pretty accurate, that there are soldiers fighting soldiers.
Yes.
And, it doesn't matter whose bullets are flying around the street. It's not a good scenario, So in some ways, it kind of diffuses its own argument if you kind of follow her experience.
Diffuses?
Well, it diffuses the argument that the novel is a kind of speculation as to what would happen if Ireland became an authoritarian state. Because once the rebels come and defeat the authoritarians, it's still a mess.
Yes, it stops being an authoritarian state and it becomes 1922.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Which, and of course, there are the resonances there in Irish history that work for Irish readers in very powerful ways. That at a kind of historical level, we know that civil wars produce a certain kind of bloody chaos.
They do.
And that become detached from any ideological or political aims. That that they can very easily descend into something that is far messier. At one level, it's Sean O'Casey, right? I defy any but the carefulest reader of Sean O'Casey to tell me, or to remember who's on which side in Juno the Paycock. That there's a civil war going on out there, but which side, where are that family, the central family placed it? I don't know.
Only in my father's last years did I ask him, what our family did in the Civil War. And he said his father wouldn't answer. His father would only say the Civil War turned father against son and brother against brother and mother against daughter. And that was it.
Yeah. And that's what happens in Prophet Song in some ways. I mean, it doesn't turn them against one another, but they know Mark is out there with the rebel army, and they see there are things happening around Dublin that the rebel army are doing that are just as bad as what was going on before. And so they know he must be complicit in this at some
Yes.
level. So there are historical resonances there, I think, for the Irish reader.
Repetition.
Yeah.
I was interested in Bailey's fixation with the idiomatic worm, and we keep waiting for the worm to turn, and the worm doesn't turn.
No, the worm doesn't turn.
So it's one of these images that Lynch dangles before us in a tantalizing way without wanting to follow that.
Yeah. No, I think that's right, and I think in some ways it's the way in which the progress of the kind of political conflict in the novel is kind of structured, that it reaches a point where it doesn't matter who's winning or losing here, that it's a descent into chaos. Yeah. But I want to go back to this idea that there's a kind of metaphysical thread running
Me
through
too.
it.
That's such a fascinating word, metaphysical.
Well, there are moments in the novel that you overlook if you're talking about the narrative, which prefigure that moment at the end where Eilish sets out to the sea. And the last lines of the novel, and she says, "To the sea, we must go to the sea. The sea is life."
Yes.
You lift out of this very particular world, this realist world, into something that is far more abstract.
We have been zooming out, though, haven't we? We said that we've gone from a very particularized depiction of Dublin to a more universal image of refugee experience. Finally we're.
Yeah. But there are other moments in the novel where this sense of weightlessness, in a funny way, is probably the best way to put it, happen. There are scenes where the family go for a walk in the Phoenix Park, and there's this sense of expanse. There's a scene where they go for a walk on Dollymount Strand, and it prefigures the sea thing. There's really strange things. There's a scene where she goes up into the attic of the house, and you realize that one of the things that Lynch does is he's a gorgeous writer. He writes in these long, sinuous sentences,
Yes,
which shift perspective sometimes within the sentence. That it goes from the perspective of the viewer, Eilish, to almost to the inanimate object that she's looking at and back again. Let me just read you one. This is just, and again, this is the sort of thing you miss if you're just talking about the narrative of the novel. This is in the texture of it.
Okay.
It's a scene where she goes up into the attic of her house and she says, "This feeling, the attic, does not belong to the house, but exists in its own right. An anteroom of memory itself, seeing before the remnants of their younger selves, the self folded, packed into boxes, bagged and discarded, lost in the disarray of vanished and other selves, the years slowly turning to dust." I mean, it's this accumulation of clauses in that sentence, which pulls the object that she's looking at, this pile of boxes in the attic, away from her. And they have this kind of existence of their own. This sense that the self who is watching, who's looking at this pile of boxes in the attic, is diminished by what she sees. I won't say it is sublime.
I was going to use the word sublime.
But it's heading in that direction.
Or I was thinking even of Mary Shelley's novel, The Last Man, about the eradication of humanity in a pandemic and an indifferent nature which will survive.
Yeah. And I mean, talking Mary Shelley, that last line of the novel, and she says, "To the sea, we must go to the sea is life." I mean, you think of the end of Frankenstein.
I thought of the Ballygowan water slogan, "Water is life."
So I think there's something else going on in this novel for which the topic that most people end up addressing when they talk about the novel, which is the political side of it,
yes,
is is, as I say, I won't say it's a distraction, but it's a distraction in the way that a magic trick works. In that you're being shown something with one hand that's drawing your attention, and you're so fascinated with what that hand is doing. The other hand is doing something that is far more powerful and transformative. And then when it happens, you think, "Oh, I didn't see that happen."
Can we pin this down? Would one way to put it be perhaps to say that you would say Lynch is more interested in what happens to the human spirit, and that this is his primary concern, where we gravitate to just a bunch of stuff that happens in the novel?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. It is about that tension between some kind of foundational core humanity, which may or may not exist, and the stuff that we accumulate around it. That, to paraphrase Beckett, gives us the illusion we exist. And that the stuff in the novel that gives us the illusion we exist, the politics, all that stuff that we could talk about for hours.
Yes.
That's the shell. And what he's really doing is giving us the opportunity to strip that away. And so I think that ending, if we try to rationalize it as we did a few minutes ago and saying, "Oh, okay, she's going on a boat, the boat will take her to England, there's an airport in England," this is the point.
Yeah, because they do stop talking about plans. That's striking. They stop talking about Canada or destinations or coordinates.
That's right.
It's all very abstract. It's all very primal. That much of, I'm sorry to return to plot when you've told me not to, but bear with me. The urge to leave has become so primal rather than vision.
The novel is almost about an escape from plot. And you think that plot involves having a past that makes sense, not just of the present, but also of the future. And what happens in the plot of the novel is that the present no longer makes sense in terms of the past. Eilish thinks that it does. And that is her struggle. She thinks, well, her husband will come home because this is Ireland, this is the way things work. She thinks if she sends her son to hospital, doctors will fix him, not torture him to death. So the past no longer connects to the present, but she's still trying to connect to a future where, okay, the rebel army will come in and they'll defeat the national army and things go back to the way they were, and her husband will reappear and she'll be able to, get the Volkswagen fixed and start send the kids back to school. That she's constantly planning the future in terms of the present. And what happens, I think, in that final few chapters of the novel, once she crosses the border, is the past no longer has a connection to the present, and hence she no longer has a future.
Those structures have disappeared.
They've disappeared.
And we know resumption is impossible.
There's a really strange passage when she comes to the border.
Okay, tell us about it.
It says, "There should be nothing on the other side but the edge of a cliff that begins a long fall down into nothingness. But instead, the road continues past the border, the prefabs graying in the dawn."
That's such a remarkable sentence. Initially, I was reminded of Jean-Paul Sartre and the experience of the death drive and staring over the edge of the cliff. And Eilish, there should be nothing. Is that resignation? Is that utmost despair? What do you make of it?
I think this is the point at which narrative collapses, that the past no longer makes sense in terms of her present, and she's unable to project
so the
a future.
past can no longer structure an imagined future.
That's right.
All of those categories, and they're all discarded.
That's right. So all that exists is a present, is a kind of being in the present. And yet, when she looks over the border, there are the prefabs, and there is a kind of future taking shape. But for her, it's not an imaginable one.
No, it's dystopian.
It's not even dystopian. It's because, and this is the tension within the novel, because she is alive, she has to be somewhere.
Yes.
So she will be somewhere. She will be in the prefabs. But in terms of who she is now nowhere. She has entered into nothingness. So again, this is where the novel, departs from a kind of recognizable reality, because that's not what it's interested in. That crossing the border means something here completely different than it's meant in any other Irish fiction in terms of crossing the border. You think of all of, Seamus Heaney's poems about crossing the border.
Sure, yeah.
This is a very different thing. You cross the border, and it's a bit like, the weather maps when the weather stops at the border. You look at the Met Éireann weather maps, and there's no border there's no weather north of the border. Or you look at the British weather maps, there's no weather south. It's that you kind of cross the border and there's nothing.
It's striking to an Irish reader the absence of any politics to the examination of the refugees by those policing the border. They are simply refugees. Right. There is no question of, say, Anglo-Irish politics or the Northern Irish state intention with the Republic. There is only erasure of the self.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You literally become nothing. That anything you were in the past is gone.
That's bleak, man.
Yeah. It is that dark a novel. I like I said, I haven't read a novel that's frightened me this much in a long time, because it strips these things down, but in a completely recognizable way.
So when you talk about how the last vision of the sea in the novel is foreshadowed by earlier walks that the family take by the sea and images of coastal Dublin, could you tell us more about those, please?
Yeah, there are a couple of passages in the novel earlier on, and they're interspersed relatively regularly, where Eilish takes the family initially to the Phoenix Park, but then there's one in particular where they go to Dollymount Strand, and it's around Christmas, so it's winter. So it's that kind of thin winter light, nobody really on the beach, and that sense of expanse, that sense of openness. The same one, of course, and any Irish writer who uses Dollymount Strand or Sandymount Strand cannot but be conscious of the whole Joycean memory that is there.
You can't unsee it.
You can't unsee the bird girl. That in Joyce's Portrait of the Artist, when Stephen looks out on the strand and sees the woman on the edge of the waves and has this vision really of what the aesthetic,
the Aisling,
is going, what the aesthetic is and what his life is going to be. There's actually a kind of comparable passage early on that just, to say, gets lost if you're just talking about the narrative. But then when the moment at the end of the novel where the sea becomes so important, you kind of go back to it. And it brings us to this idea of moments in which we are able to live fully immersed in a present. It goes like this. And again, it's one of these amazing sentences that Lynch writes that's made of this kind of sinuous build of clauses.
You remind me of Edward Gibbon. Go on.
Watching the light upon the beach, thinking, this time of light, how the days pass by, gathering the light and releasing light into night. And we reach but cannot touch, nor take what passes, what seems to pass, time's dream. And I think it's just an amazing sentence.
This time of light.
This time of light. Yeah. It cannot touch nor take what passes, what seems to pass. So it's like time doesn't really pass. It just seems to pass. Time's dream. That there's just this immersion in the fullness of the present. Right? And I think, most of us have felt that at some time on a beach like Dollymount, or, some of the beaches in the west of Ireland where you go and there's nobody on it, and it's December and it's blowing a gale, and there might be somebody so far down the beach you're not even sure whether there's a person or not. And you just feel completely not just alone in the universe, but that alone in time, that you're just fully immersed in this present. And I think that's an intimation of where the novel goes at the end.
That's the lesson that Eilish needs to take on, ultimately.
Yeah. Excellent. I think that's the core of the aesthetic in the novel, is that stripping down to that moment of being in the present.
Let's not make it too glib. We sound like we're selling a gym membership. You're leading me to think differently about that novel now.
Good. I've had ferocious debates with people about it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I know people who don't like it. And for a lot of some of the reasons that you raised earlier, that people find the politics implausible.
That's distracting. It is very distracting. Eilish is a very kind of stock figure for a novel that centers on an individual narrator.
Yeah, but the thing about Eilish is, and again, one of the things that terrifies me with the novel is I think, if that was me, that's probably more or less what I would do.
Well, I think that's what I initially was inclined to criticize in her character as being a sort of stock maternal figure can be explained by the way you see the novel overall, because Eilish undergoes this process of erasure, and one aspect of which, of course, is when her professional identity is taken away from her.
Yeah.
And she is no longer a scientist. Yeah. And that happens gradually. It isn't just when she's fired. It's when she's pushed into being an administrator and away from the scientific research. Yeah. And by shades and degrees, she is no longer a biologist.
Yeah. And the same thing happens in a different way. This is Lynch looking for a different way to do this with her father, Simon, who has dementia. Any of us who have ever had experience of a relative who has dementia, you know that as the disease progresses, you cease to have that same relationship, to the point at which, quite often it becomes to a point of non-recognition.
Yes.
Which one are you? Who are you? And I think what Lynch does with the character of Simon, her father, is you see that she's also ceasing to be a daughter. She ceased to be a scientist. She ceased to be a daughter. She ceased to be a wife. And the only thing left is being a mother. She ceased to be a citizen. All those categories that define her are stripped away one by one.
Is there more to say about the character of Simon than Eilish's father in relation to what we've been discussing on erasure? Because he, of course, in the course of his dementia, undergoes similar erasures. He loses his own certainties in ways that are analogous to society at large losing its certainties. And yet he is strangely functional in his misconceptions about time and place and human identity, and as it were, he escapes in the end.
Yeah, I think that's why he's there. I think that's exactly how he works as a character. That he is undergoing, if you like, this process of erasure, which in some ways is what dementia is that as the disconnection from memories occurs, the thing that we think make the person are slowly, if you like, unplugged.
That's right.
And yet he continues to function. And so in lots of ways, I think, what's happening with the wider society, the wider world that Eilish lives in, is also happening at an individual level with her father.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a microcosm.
Yeah. And it goes to that whole question of time, that once you no longer have a connection to your past, you're no longer able to imagine a future. I've been doing some work here and talking to a good friend and colleague here, Shane O'Mara, who's a neuroscientist. We've been talking about things like attention and how the mind works. And he keeps sending me things to read, so I'm reading neuroscience articles. He sent me one with this great title, Amnesiacs Have No Future, which is basically about what happens when the brain's ability to either retrieve or make memories is impaired for whatever reason. How individuals who experience that loss of memory also experience a contingent, if you like, loss of ability to imagine the future, to make plans.
That's right. Or plans become much more immediate and to do with basic necessity.
Yeah. But if you can't remember how something was done in the past, you can't imagine how you might do it in the future. So when you lose the past, you lose the future. And in some ways, that's what happens, certainly is what happens with Simon, but it's what happens to the whole society, but particularly to Eilish here.
What can we do then with this image of hope? Does that give us enough at the end of the novel? What's the point in such a dark novel?
That's a good question.
Especially if we take your reading that the politics is something of a kind of a bluff, or it's not the primary interest.
Yeah.
And therefore we don't need to take it as some kind of warning against voting for the wrong person.
Yeah.
What are we left with then if human nature is so fallible?
No, I know exactly where you're going with that. I mean, what do we do with it? I think we're back to Sean O'Casey. One of the thing that is held on to, that remains here, is a bond of family. That even though Eilish loses two of her sons, Mark off fighting with the rebels and possibly killed, Bailey killed, Ben and Molly are still there with her at the end. So the one thing that's left when everything else is stripped away is that human bond. That bond that makes, in this case, three people almost a unit, almost one thing. That never weakens. If anything, it strengthens as time goes on. So I think if we want to try and salvage something here that is not simply a kind of nihilism, I think that's where we find it. That there is a love possible between people, that you can strip everything else away and that will persist. But you have to do a lot of stripping away before you get to it.
I sure do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
Irish Books is hosted by Christopher Murray and produced by Martin Franklin for East Coast Studio, with support from the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Embassy of Ireland Australia, and Monash University.